This is Top of Mind, the Dr. Patrick Slowinski Show.
Welcome, dear listeners, and this is another episode of Top of Mind podcast. We have an amazing guest today who will be introduced by Dr. Slowinski.
Thank you, Victor. Well, folks, it's my pleasure to have another great guest on. We've had a stream of excellent guests, and this is one of my colleagues from the State Department who spent 3 decades of his life working for the State Department as a Foreign Service officer, and his specialization was consular affairs. And so I've got a few questions for him in mind about visas and immigration and things that he has tremendous expertise over, like I said, over 3 decades of work on that. So Phil Linderman is our guest today. He is also one of the founders of the Ben Franklin Fellowship, which we've had a few of our guests on. We're also members of that organization. He'll talk a little bit about that. Tremendous career as a Foreign Service officer, and now he's out planting seeds of goodwill and having people look at foreign policy maybe from a different approach, not just the one that we've had traditionally, which kind of leans, which not kind of, but really leans left in many ways. And so Phil is going to talk to us a little bit about that, what he's been up to, and some of the great places that he served while he was a Foreign Service officer. So with that, Phil, anything you want to add to your bio? I wanted to give you enough room there to plant some seeds.
Oh, Patrick, that was terrific. Thank you for the invitation to be on the program with you. Thank you for those kind words. Always appreciate the chance to learn from you.
Oh, I appreciate that, Phil. Well, look, there's a lot of foreign policy stuff going around, so we have you here, and I know that you're connected with a lot of folks in Washington. You're out there busy uh, getting the word out, listening. What are you hearing about the big issues that Secretary Rubio has on his plate, as well as our president, in terms of Iran and Israel? And what roles, not just Iran and Israel, but we have Russia, Ukraine, we have China looking over at Taiwan. What are you hearing in terms of Secretary Rubio's approach from the president, and what our folks that are actually in the field as Foreign Service officers or U.S. diplomats are saying as well?
Well, I might start by pointing out that yesterday, as I'm sure you saw as well, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Ninth Circuit's injunction against reorganization and reduction in force in Foggy Bottom was lifted. I think right now the most pressing matter is actually not a foreign matter in terms of our U.S. foreign policy, but it's right here in Foggy Bottom, which is the restructuring, the reorg, which is literally about to be put into place from what I am hearing. I'm not an insider, I'm an outsider, but my contacts in State Department say the reorg plan is ready and they will be moving on it with deliberate speed. It is reportedly going to reduce 15% of the staff at Foggy Bottom. It is going to reduce over 100 offices in terms of the bureaucratic structure inside State Department. So I think the very first thing is to swallow those changes and to see how it will affect our ability to have a common sense foreign policy abroad, which is what I think we in the Ben Franklin Fellowship and most Americans expect that the State Department engage in, a common sense foreign policy that serves the national interest, that's not out doing things like communicating the woke agenda to conservative cultures, traditional cultures abroad, but serving basic American interests in the context of our Constitution, which makes the president the executive that runs U.S. foreign policy, his principal instrument to do that. Diplomacy is the Department of State, which is directly accountable to the president through the secretary, and hopefully a long-term accountable as well to Congress and the people. But our first commander in chief is the president. So, swallowing all that and then turning to these big issues that you just laid out in your opening, Russia, Iran, the Middle East, is a pretty daunting task. I mean, you have to take your hat off to Secretary Rubio, who's taken on this job, don't you think?
Yeah, and he's not just taking on this job, he's also the acting director of USAID, as that gets folded into the State Department. Um, A lot of people here where I live are really angry about that. I think personally, some have lost jobs. Just the culture of federal employees here being able to never lose their job has kind of been ingrained for decades. So that's a hard pill for some people to swallow. But he's taking that big task on, and I, for one, that there are better ways, I think, more efficient ways, less expensive ways to American taxpayers to do foreign assistance. And I think that's what they're trying to grapple with over there in the State Department. In addition to that, he's acting National Security Advisor, the NSA, for the president. I had the great opportunity to have then Senator Rubio come and visit us in Poland when I was the Consul General in Krakow, which is just a beautiful, amazing fairy tale place. One of the best tours I ever had. Plus, I'm Polish, so it was really good for me. But I noticed then when I was just interacting with him, the energy he has, the concentration he has, and he's fairly unflappable on interviews. I don't know if you've watched any of his interviews. He's quite,
I have. Yeah.
yeah, he holds clinics every time he
And not
and
only that, I think just to jump in, I think the man, and I don't claim that I have any deep insights here, just observing that the man has a genuine sense of humor. And
oh,
I think
very,
that's a
very
great,
funny. Very
that's a great
dry.
tool.
It's very dry, right? Because he's very serious, and then all of a sudden he hits you with one of these zingers. But he's got a big job, and by no means are we demeaning or making light of a lot of the potential for world peace is in his hands. Of course, you've laid it out properly, and so has Secretary Rubio, that the president decides foreign policy, not the Secretary of State, not the Secretary of Defense, not the media, not Congress. It's the president. And we all know that President Trump is really striving to get peace. Let's talk about a couple of things I wanted to have you talk about because I think it's very relevant for our listeners to hear from someone who was a consular officer for over 3 decades. And that means you have your experience with visas, with immigration law, with all sorts of different statuses that people can obtain when they come to the United States as a foreigner. And one of the things that, if we keep talking about Secretary Rubio, that's been fascinating, is that he's been kind of hammered for the gall of him to actually use the Immigration and Naturalization Act language in there to allow him to revoke visas of people that he thinks have done things that disqualify them for being in the United States. So let's talk about that for a second, and then we can talk about worker visas and other programs associated with that.
Yeah, I would, and I'll also start off. I was a consular officer, and for sure, as you just described, a big part of the consular portfolio for those people who are not in the business is to attend to foreigners who want to come to the United States, and that's typically through a visa, right? And that's a big part of what the U.S. State Department does abroad. It is often underappreciated. In many ways, it's not a sexy subject, but 35% of um, the U.S. financial deployment around the world is tied up in the processing of visas, so that it is a matter that's it should be done with in the legal framework. It's very much a legal process, consumes, as I say, a lot of our time and attention abroad, a lot of our staffing. And why should it not be considered perhaps the most fundamental part of our foreign policy? Because it goes to the question of who do we let to come into America? Who are the people foreign people, and we have, nothing but the good intention to find our friends and allies abroad. But when it comes to the question of letting people come to our country as a temporary visitor in most cases, because it's important to remember visas are in two categories, non-immigrant visas and immigrant visas. Immigrant visas are people who are coming to the United States to become residents and stay in the country, in theory. And non-immigrant visas are people who are coming for a short-term purpose. It could be tourism, it could be business trips, it could be they are set up to work in a certain category. They could be students, and there are many categories, daunting the number of categories. But my point is that decisions about admitting those people into our country are the most fundamental part of our foreign policy, and it's one that's particularly underappreciated.
Yeah, and I was not a consular officer, I was an economic officer, but we all kind of have this rite of passage as foreign service officers and diplomats, where most of us will do a consular tour. It was one of my favorite tours. I was in Warsaw and I was going through and determining whether I thought that person in front of me, the Polish citizen in front of me, usually Polish citizen, mostly Polish citizen, sometimes other people that were living in Warsaw but maybe had a different passport. They would come to the embassy, which is exactly what they're supposed to do. And I would spend a couple minutes with them and go over their documents and make a decision on whether I thought that their intent was to come for whatever the reason of the visa was, whether it was immigration, whether it was non-immigrant for tourism or business. And that was such an amazing opportunity. And we do that all over the world. Our foreign service officers do that all over the world, and it's an extremely important job. So we're grateful to them for that. But I want to get back to what Secretary Rubio has been hammered for, because I don't think we've had a Secretary of State, at least in my lifetime that I know of, who has actually publicly revoked visas of folks
Yeah.
and been very public. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. How common is that? And is that going to be a continued trend as you see we uncover more and more people who maybe haven't been the best holders of those visas and kept everything the way they were supposed to?
Yeah, I applaud Secretary Rubio for entering directly into the conduct and the use of visa holders in the United States, because it is ultimately the Secretary of State who has the legal statutory responsibility to oversee all this apparatus. We've never had, you're exactly right, Patrick, we've never had a Secretary of State who's entered into these questions so robustly and with so much consequence. I mean, but this is tied directly to the political agenda of the Trump administration, which is about securing our borders. It's about knowing who is in our country lawfully and unlawfully. And the Secretary of State, like the Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security and many other government officials, but these two primary persons in our government are statutorily charged to get this right. And when the previous administration essentially opened our borders to people who had very bogus asylum claims, and they used all kinds of other tools, in many cases going beyond the law, for admitting these people into our country, these foreigners who wanted to come to our countries, is an extraordinary chapter in American history that historians are going to have to go back and to analyze. Why did the Biden administration decide to put on steroids the admission of some 10 million people into our country in the course of 4 years, of which about 8 million, the numbers are always very convoluted, but just to focus on this for a second, it's about 10 million people that were admitted during the Biden, Secretary Mayorkas, Secretary of State Blinken tutelage of our government.
Does that include gotaways? Does that include the gotaways?
Yeah, no, that's an estimate of maybe what the gotaways are. No, we don't know the number of gotaways, because in some cases, we get into a lot of definitions and terms, but just in broad strokes here for your listeners to understand, about cumulatively 10 million people have come in this time period. Some have argued a bigger number, some have argued a smaller number, but I think from the professional statisticians and policy experts, and I deal with a number of them because I'm on the board of the Center for Immigration Studies. Let's say the number is 10 million. That also includes a category of people who got here for a little bit of time and then left. It also includes people who entered in another era and also left. But it's around a figure of about 10 million. But the question is, these people would not have been admitted lawfully under the legal apparatus that the Congress had put into place, any fair administration of that legal machinery. They would not have been admitted. So you have 10 million people coming into our country, causing all kinds of havoc in communities, schools, social service. Look at the crises in New York City. Extraordinary, right? But so that's the backdrop to why Secretary Rubio now enters and goes very much into the question of who are the people who are here, maybe lawfully or semi-lawfully, because sometimes the status can be debated, but to examine why they're here. And many of them who have been troublemakers, frankly, have come on student visas. This is the category that got so much attention, and Secretary Rubio's entered into, and he's revoked the visas. And these are people in a number of cases who've come to join protests on the Hamas war, Israel-Hamas war, have these very aggressive political positions, campus protests going into campus disruption and anti-Semitism and other extreme activity committed by people in many cases who are here on a student visa. So this very much got the attention of Secretary Rubio. I applaud it. I think it's what the American people expect the Secretary of State to do. Sure, the Secretary of State has global responsibilities, and what's going on in Iran is important, China, name it. But Americans want to know that the machinery of admitting foreigners into our country, that the Secretary administers and is directly responsible for, is done well. I mean, we may not be able to guarantee the security of Taiwan, but we certainly should be able to guarantee the admission of people into our country who are causing trouble. And if they're causing that trouble, to revoke their visa and have them leave. And we can discuss the legal status that the Secretary has used to revoke these visas. It's an interesting legal question, but I'm only applauding, agreeing to you, giving some context on why the Secretary is right to enter into these questions. And all kinds of visa categories are under close examination, as they should be, because people who are admitted into our country often come with the expectation that they will adhere to the terms of the visas. And the vast majority of them do. They come as a tourist, they go to Florida, they have a good trip, they get on the airplane, they go home. But since we admit millions of people on visas, a large number of those people can overstay their visas, can cause all kinds of disruption, can engage in criminal activity, et cetera, even under normal circumstances. But if you go back again to the 10 million number that the Biden administration is responsible for having brought into this country, you just put on steroids the chaos of the foreign presence in the United States. It's why the Trump administration, in my modest judgment, I'm not a political observer of the first level, but it's why the Trump administration won the election, to regain the control of the border, to regain control of the question, right, who's in our
That's
country.
exactly right. I mean, the border issue, and we're going to dig into that a little bit more here. But I think one of the reasons why there's not more outrage among people, and I think one of the good things that President Trump and his team did in the 2024 campaign was really really hammer the negative effects of illegal immigration. And they really focused on just a couple of items: the illegal drugs, criminals coming through themselves, and then conducting those crimes or setting up those crime organizations when they're here, and then drug smuggling and fentanyl, resulting in a lot of deaths. But there's even more than just the trafficking and the fentanyl and the criminals, gangs that were set up taking over apartment buildings in Colorado. You also have the secondary and tertiary effects. And I work with a lot of educators who are working on their doctorate and education degrees. And so I get to talk to them sometimes. But the amount of resources, and look, we're a country that understands that people are having a hard time. They came here for whatever reason it may be. But if they came in illegally, they're still taking resources for people who are entitled to them. They're not entitled. And I think if we go back to Secretary Rubio's sage advice is words when he answers this question to reporters, is getting a visa is a privilege, not a right. And I think you have this conflation with the legal system stirring up with the Americans that visa holders or illegal immigrants or aliens that are in our country without the proper documentation or authority or visa or permission, that they are entitled somehow to all these benefits that Americans are entitled to. And so my question to you is, do you think the word has gotten out that this is much to the American voters and taxpayers, that this is even a lot worse than the drug traffickers, the human traffickers, the organized crime, and and actually the trafficking in children, which is just disgusting.
Yeah.
Um, it's a lot worse than that in the longer term when all these cities and states get hammered by not having the resources to educate their populace or feed their populace or take care of their populace.
I think that message of the disruption that's caused when a country absorbs or is forced to absorb more foreign presence than it can anticipate and can handle, and how that exactly as you described, how that has a ripple effect of disruption, schools, apartments, housing, medical services, just the basic functioning of social services. That is why you found it was probably underreported in the media, a huge backlog in New York City, which is traditionally a sanctuary city. But Mayor Adams, in fact, reversed those policies because the and the criminality that came with the illegal presence was just over the top. And so there are a number of places that across the country which have had a reputation of being a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state. And those, I suggest that those political moorings are being tested right now, even among the people in those jurisdictions who probably generally want to be, consider themselves to be open to foreigners, et cetera. But when they are confronted with the reality of trying to manage the chaos that comes with the massive movement of people, they may be reevaluating their values on this.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
think I think that's really happening. We've mentioned a little bit for our viewers and our listeners who don't a lot of what foreign service officers are, or if you say you work for the State Department, they sometimes rightly say what state because it's not top of mind for them like our show, right? So
yeah.
they're always wondering what do these people do that work for the State Department overseas? And so I want to spend a little time with you. You have a lot of experience. You and I go back and forth with our friends and colleagues in the Ben Franklin Fellowship about the best ways to get messages out to young Americans who want to serve their country overseas. Maybe they don't want to enlist in the military or they can't for whatever reason, but they would like to serve and they see a career as a diplomat as something exciting or something duty bound that they would love to do. What kind of, you had 30 years, I had over 20 years. What kind of candidates should the State Department be looking for in their future diplomats, Phil?
I think we need to find people, young people who believe in our country, believe in our values, and are open to the world and want to go into this career. I mean, I remember in my own case, I'm a political conservative, but I also was very much interested in the world. And I combined what I thought was a deep grounding in our constitutional values and high respect for that, and wanted to take my perspective to the world, and I found it to be a fascinating career. I think people who might be attracted to this career, and it's changed since more than 30 years ago, 35, I don't want to count the years, many decades ago when I was into the career, there was not the capacity to know about the world so easily as we have today with the online world, right? You had to literally go to the library or find some film or television or materials. You couldn't quickly sit down and get video and all the latest news, et cetera, from a country. It just didn't exist. So we have to have people who are interested in the world. We have to have people who are grounded in what it is to be an American, because a diplomat is tested. They're not just put out there as a neutral person. They're put out there in the context of being a representative of our country and its values. And this is a high honor. So I believe, to answer your question very specifically, we need to widen our intake of young people to the career, to make the traditional pathways are Georgetown University, some other elite or high prestige universities are the grounds which people typically will be directed to a career in the Foreign Service. I think that's fine, but I think that needs to be considerably widened to take people who have other backgrounds, who are more fundamentally tied to what it is to be an American, as opposed to someone who might come out of a master's program in Georgetown and have some great knowledge of international organizations and all the rest of it. But that's not really what we want our diplomats to be about at their core in the first instance. So let's, we've talked about this. In fact, you and I have, Patrick, because I know your academic perch gives you a great vision into this world, but we need probably to break out of the mold of what we've been using to bring people into the service and the diplomatic service.
Well, I think one of the
yeah,
issues that you brought up is that a lot of those schools have a similar Weltanschauung, as our German friends say, worldview, right? So they kind of all glob together, and it's over the decades, it's built a kind of a one-party ideology at the State Department. So I'm okay actually with going to the smaller universities across the heartlands of our country, over to the West Coast, to places where, up in Montana, places where a lot of these wonderfully bright, talented people are just don't know about the Foreign Service, and they don't know about the opportunity. And I think that that's something that if we specifically get away from, there's several psychology books on that are very popular in the business world about playing to your strengths. And, if you've got a reservoir full of great candidates, why would you change your strategy? Well, because we've seen what that's kind of done, and if people become complacent, they become tied to one ideology and one way of doing things, and it stymies our growth as a foreign service. So I'm all for sending a group of folks out to Liberty down in Lynchburg, Virginia, where I happen to be an adjunct professor, to other universities across and colleges, maybe not just universities, vocational schools, and just getting people to know about it, that, hey, this may be a potential career for you. Yes, there are tests that you have to take and pass, and you gotta, if it's something you want to do, there's some things you've got to accomplish to get to that goal. But that's what I think. I think that we can utilize the university systems and the college systems, maybe even high schools. I mean, our rules say that to become a diplomat, you have to be at least 18 years old and have graduated from high school. So I
yeah.
also think about the people who, I mean, we know that having a college education and some world experience under your belt really helps you pass the test and move forward, because you can't just come to the State Department as a clean slate. You have to have some experience and some other skills that normally people don't have at that age. They can, but and then I was thinking about people who come over to the State Department, maybe not right out of college, because that's actually fairly rare for us. Our average hiring age is 34. And we have a lot of folks that have done a second career, maybe this will be a third career, and they bring a lot of wealth of experience and energy too. So I think we should actually just go to a lot of these places and just say, hey, have you ever thought about this? If you love your country, you love its values, you love what it stands for good and for bad, during good times and bad times, who's ever in charge, you're still going to be out there for America first. You're going to be out there supporting your country at the time, no matter who's president, and you're going to work your tail off wherever they send you. Those are the kind of people we need. That's what I think.
No, I think that you're exactly right, and that also requires some rejiggering of the standards that we use at State Department to bring people in.
Yeah.
That also needs to be re-examined. I believe that's on the agenda of Secretary Rubio and his team. There is another way to bring in Americans. I mean, the previous administration particularly talked about having a State Department that reflected on America. Well, I mean, but for them, what that meant was to have people who were all quoted up in the different sort of racial categories and sexual orientation categories,
Gender.
etc.
Mhm.
Yeah, and gender and the rest of it. It had little to do with the idea of people's ideas about what the country is, what America should be doing in the world, because basically they assumed all the people coming into them from the top quote unquote elite universities were already sold on green energy, wokeism, globalism, and multilateralism. All these questions were settled, and they were in the U.S. national interest. I think what you suggest and what I'm suggesting is that we go back to the United States, the country as a whole, and look at all the great centers of ideas and thinkings and represent that, and not necessarily quotas on race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation.
Well, you ready for my next segue? Is that I
Yeah.
think a certain Dr. Slowinski has a couple articles on the Ben Franklin Fellowship website about this, but I've written extensively about the psychology of unfairness and the meritocracy versus programs like DEI. And I think there is a hunger for people to understand how could we make the process actually fair? Because really, in many people's minds, the idea of equity is actually special treatment and not fairness. And what we want to do is say anybody, no matter where they come from, what they look like, you've got a chance to come and be a part of this team as well. And we're not gonna continue to give certain people special treatment and others not. And I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, your work on this is very good, and I commend it and urge people to take a look at it. It's on our website, the benfranklinfellowship.org. Uh, I yeah, I totally agree with the premise. The criticism that we get is that we're trying to reinstitute America, say, from the 1950s and the treatment of people from the 1950s. That is a bogus argument. No one's trying to do that. We're trying to treat people as individuals. We recognize the era that we lived in. We recognize at the same time that the constitutional standard in the United States is not to discriminate
Yeah.
based on race, ethnicity, and all the rest of those categories. It is Martin Luther King standard of treating people as an individual based on their character and abilities. Stop. And that's where this Department of State should be. Those who claim that they can use tools, DEI, so quote unquote DEI tools, to manage this and to get certain outcomes, are full of their own hubris. They do not have the skill to do that, and it's a task that they should not be allowed to undertake because it treats other people unfairly.
You know, one of the things that we've done really well, I think, at the State Department, I know a little bit about this because I was involved. I'm a industrial and organizational psychologist, so I look at data and I look at testing and examinations. And I think we've done a good job over the year with our tests over the years, trying to get out and make them as neutral as possible so people can say, well, you have an advantage in taking this test because of this. We make it as neutral as possible to reduce any adverse impact and just make it fair for everybody. So I feel very strongly that the testing processes that have been in there for decades are really good at the State Department. What we need to do is change our ideology and our mentality, and that's a hard one. Is that to realize what we're trying to achieve is equality, not special treatment.
Yeah.
And so with that, I want to give you a couple minutes here to talk about the Ben Franklin Fellowship, what it is, what it isn't. We've had a couple guests on, but I still get a lot of questions about this. So this is why I want to have you on and also maybe address the political piece and some other pieces that are traditionally known as hit pieces. And why people are kind of upset, why some people are upset with the Ben Franklin Fellowship and why many people are drawn to it.
Yeah, thanks for that question. The Ben Franklin Fellowship is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. That is to say, we do not endorse political candidates. We do stand for ideas and principles, and those ideas we try to foster in government and with educational tools. But we are both a membership and a policy organization. By membership, we mean we are networking people, largely career people in the Department of State. They can be active duty or retired. They can be foreign service or civil service. In some cases, they're contractors. Some cases, they're political appointees or in other categories. But essentially, they are foreign policy professionals, and they all share the values that we list in our principles, which are linked very much to a U.S. national interest foreign policy. That's the first measure, is a foreign policy engagement internationally in the concrete national interest of the United States. And how so? We believe in secure, strong borders. We think that very much border policy is foreign policy. If you don't protect your borders, if you don't govern who comes into your country, then you have chaos. And most Americans rightly expect their diplomats and their the people who patrol their borders and the diplomats who are serving abroad are working to keep our borders safe from illegal entry. And we believe essentially in American sovereignty. We still believe in sovereign nations. We may engage in international organizations. In many cases, that's in the national interest to do so. We are involved in many different international fora for sure, but we protect American sovereignty. We do not surrender to other organizations on questions that go to the issue of rule of law in the United States, rule of law among American citizens, our constitutional values. So those are the principles. You can read them. Anyone can read them. BenFranklinFellowship.org. And why are we being pushed back against? Well, in essence, we are challenging much of the orthodoxy that has grown up, particularly in the past 2 or 3 decades in Washington, in the diplomatic career services, foreign service, and related professional foreign policy practitioners, as well as in the national security bureaucracy, people who work for the NSC and in other organizations. There's been an orthodoxy that has grown up, has been inculcated in the past few decades to have like the high values are DEI. The Biden administration integrated DEI not only in hiring and promotions in the career services, but as a feature of U.S. foreign policy. We were going to foreign governments and instructing them on how to do DEI.
More than that, if I can jump in here, Phil, is
sure.
that our officers and specialists were promoted and evaluated based on a DEI principles, and they didn't even know how to prove it. They didn't even know how to deal with that. And so that's been removed, I hope. Well, at least I'm hearing that it may be removed. And something that's more fair for everyone and equal and not special treatment. And so I agree with you on all those issues that what the Ben Franklin Fellowship could do. There was a piece in Politico that wasn't so flattering, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Ben Franklin Fellowship is doing to kind of counter a lot of these myths about us?
Yeah, there was a Politico piece that you said, which is widely read, both in the United States, Washington, but abroad as well. Politico is a powerful, particularly in Europe, a powerful.
Yeah, I've unfortunately been in a political piece before.
So so it has a wide readership. It is politically left of center. It is globalist. It is green. It is woke. And so, I mean, there's exceptions on that, but in general, it's in that quote unquote modern orthodoxy. So when you challenge that modern orthodoxy, as we have done, you get a lot of pushback. I mean, the Financial Times did a piece on us. There was a couple of other, New York Times has mentioned us as well. But why they are doing it is
some of our unhinged former colleagues have mentioned us as well.
I may be exhibit A for them on this, but if you challenge the orthodoxy, then you do get pushback. And we were successful in networking our people. I mean, you might think by reputation, we're talking about the State Department, and it's all sort of liberal left, but it's not. There are many good career people who are fundamentally in line with our constitutional values. We work for the president, all these things that are part or should be part of what we are about in the bureaucracy and in our actions abroad. So we have networked people, and by networking, as the Marxists have taught us, by networking you can radically increase your you can link up people and you can expand your voice. And we have brought new recruits because many people in the career services see how essentially unhinged DEI policy was in terms of promotions, exactly what you just described. What was DEI? People were unfairly treated in their individual careers because of DEI. So we have had large numbers of people in the career service, active duty right now, come to us. And we're very gratified for that. Yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing was that for so many years, and this is something you have to give President Trump and his team and the whole MAGA movement some credit for, is that people, at least my experience in the last 20 years, were people that had conservative values really weren't allowed to talk about them very openly or post things without severe repercussions, while their more liberal colleagues could say anything they wanted. And so that kind of dichotomy, dichotomy of unfairness is just, it's kind of nice that now we have an organization where I'm sometimes pinching myself that we have, these foreign affairs specialists that, are looking at the world and policy differently than what traditionally you would think from the State Department. So with that, Phil, I'm gonna have to let end us here today, but I want to tell our listeners and our viewers again to please visit benfranklin.org, benfranklinfellowship.org, and see all of Phil's great leadership and work. He's a humble guy. He doesn't take a lot of credit, but he's one of the three founders. We've had all the founders on the show, by the way. So we've had Simon Hankinson, and then also we've had Matt Boyce on as well, talking about Poland. But Phil, thank you so much for being on the program. I hope to reciprocate the favor one day and come over to, I know you guys are doing a lot of work yourself and have your own podcast coming up at the Ben Franklin Fellowship. And let's stay in touch and have you back on soon.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thanks for what you're doing with your podcast, Top of Mind, what you're doing in the whole field academically, organizationally. So you are a great ally, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Phil.
In a world full of noise, clarity is power. Stay informed, stay aware, stay top of mind.